Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Wesley Chun. I'm a developer advocate, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, well, you read the title. You think I can make it longer? All right. There's some meaning behind that, and we're going to go over that. So a little bit about myself. My job is to make sure that developers everywhere, like you all, are going to be successful using G Suite and other Google developer tools and APIs. I'm also the host of the G Suite Dev Show on YouTube, so if you like learning off of videos, every single video is between 5 and 10 minutes long, pretty short. And the whole point is to show you one actionable, one learnable skill that you can pick up and use right away in your code. You can also find me on the blogs, whether it's the general Google Developers blog or the G Suite Developers blog. And then there's some Twitters as well. My background is I've been an engineer for 20 plus years. If some of you were around 20 years ago, we're having the 20th anniversary of when Yahoo Mail launched in October of 1998. Oh my God. Another decade has passed. I'm getting older. Anyway, I was one of the 9 or 10 engineers that built that originally in a programming language called Python. Since then, I've written a couple of Python books. Outside of work, I teach Python to companies that would have me, and I'm also a member of the Python Software Foundation. But this talk isn't about me, it's about all of you. I'm very happy to be here today, whether it's at I/O, at a Google Developer Day, or at Cloud Next. I'm really excited to see the confluence of all the developers that are coming in worldwide to learn about what we have to offer, learning how to use these skills, build on them, and become successful. So really, this talk is all about you, and it's also for you. So what's the agenda for today? So I'm going to give you a quick high-level introduction as to why you're here. This talk is it's a high-level introduction to G Suite developer tools and APIs that is meant for both developers as well as IT decision makers. So whether you're a technical manager or you're a CIO, CTO, all of this content is for you. So after the quick intro, I'll go into our REST APIs. Then I'll talk about our serverless platforms, AppScript and AppMaker, and then do some miscellaneous and wrap up. But the main takeaway is I want to expose you to all the different ways that you can use G Suite APIs. A lot of people don't know we have APIs. So first of all, I need to make that clear that we have APIs for you. Second of all, I want you to be able to decide which environment you want your applications to run in, whether it be in your environment where you use your programming language, you run it on your stack, in your data centers, or in your cloud vendor. So we have REST APIs available for that. However, we also have our environment, which you can use as well, and that would be AppScript and AppMaker. These are higher level developer platforms that give you more convenience at the exchange of a little bit less flexibility. You get to choose a customized JavaScript environment, which is AppScript, or a low coding platform where you can drag and drop apps from a palette and then connect that to a data source, and that's AppMaker. And both AppScript and AppMaker are following the current trend of serverless application hosting platforms where you're only concerned about writing the application and not worrying about spinning up VMs and servers and managing resources and scaling. All that stuff is taken care of for you. All right, so why you are here. Hopefully your boss didn't force you to come to this talk. All right, but the main idea is we're all familiar with G Suite, or Google Apps, as it used to be known. We have a lot of tools to help you create, collaborate, communicate, all right, manage and control. All right, so we're all familiar with these applications from a user perspective. Okay, and G Suite is used at a lot of companies worldwide, probably yours. It's also used in a lot of schools as well. Now, from a bird's eye view, what is Google Cloud as a whole? Well, it's actually made up of the Google Cloud Platform on one side and G Suite on the other. So GCP is responsible for the infrastructure and platform as a service levels of cloud computing. And then G Suite is responsible for the SaaS level, okay? But while most people associate GCP for developers and G Suite is for user productivity apps, I'm here to ensure that you guys are all aware that the developer side of G Suite doesn't remain out of sight of minds and tech professionals. Because if you are all using these apps and that's all you're thinking about, well, I'm here to fix that, okay? So this talk is called Power Your Apps With, and then I list all these different apps that you guys see up here. Why? Because you can, okay? You can definitely do something like that. For example, you're investigating a massive amount of data. You're probably using GCP to do some analysis on that data, whether it be our machine learning tools, BigQuery for analysis, and you're able to come up with insights and ideas. But at the end of the day, you still have to take these insights and present them to management, right? Okay, so the thing is, if you've already built the code that does the first part, why not build the code that does the last part? Because with G Suite APIs, you can use Google Sheets to look at the data more easily, to generate charts to make things more visual, and to auto-generate a slide deck, create a Google Calendar invite for management, and then use Gmail to notify them to come listen to you give that presentation, right? But previously, we didn't think about these things before because we were purely thinking about, GCP developer tools and things like that, but we didn't know that we could code Gmail, Calendar, Drive, Doc Sheets, and Slides. So I'm here to show you that you can do that. Okay, so instead of making an app and putting an app store and hoping it goes viral, all right, well, you can put it in the G Suite Marketplace. So when a company adopts your app, instead of hoping you really go viral with a mobile app, if companies install your app, you could instantly have 100 users, 1,000 users, 100,000 users. And I don't know if you can see the numbers here, but Smartsheet is one of the add-ons that you can install from the G Suite Marketplace, and they're already over 8 million users. So this slide, even though I took this screenshot not too long ago, they've really had a large increase in the number of users. So you can actually expose your code elsewhere. All right. By the way, all of these things are public, but you can also make apps that are only available internally for your corporate users. All right. You don't have to make them public like this. Okay. And also, we're going to have an upcoming feature where admins can choose which kind of apps can be run from within your G Suite domain. Okay. All right, but how does one get started using our APIs? Some developers have told us that it's not always easy to learn. Maybe there's not enough documentation or not enough working examples. Okay, so my job is to blow away these barriers to entry so you'll feel more like this. All right? So you ready to get started? Okay, awesome. We're going to jump right into the lowest level, which are the HTTP-based REST APIs. Now, the standard API request response workflow goes something like this. Your application makes a request to an API. All right, you have to make sure you get all the right authorization. You have to manage your keys. All right, then when you have a valid access token, you can talk to our APIs, make a service request, and then get a response from that API. Okay, so typical client-server stuff with a little bit of security in between, right? Everybody's familiar with this. Okay, so this is exactly the same as how G Suite APIs work. All right, so while you can manage your own keys, you can manage, getting the access token, storing that, using it until it expires. Then you have to manage the refresh token and having to go and request a new access token once it expires. You could do all that stuff, but you're adding more code to your application that has nothing to do with the functionality that you're building, right? So it's better to use one of our client libraries, all right? So in the examples that I'm going to show you today, we're going to have the source code in Python, but that doesn't mean it's the only language you can use. Obviously, a lot of companies use different languages, so we want to make sure that we have a client library that's available for your development environment. So we have Java supported, JavaScript on the client side, we call that browser. There's JavaScript on the server side for Node. There's .NET and C#, Objective-C, Swift for iOS, PHP, Dart, Go, Ruby. So hopefully that covers what everybody's developing in. Otherwise, you can still use C++ as well too. You can, in fact, just talk HTTP directly to the APIs. You don't have to use a client library, all right? So just be aware of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to present each of the G Suite APIs and maybe a couple of others. What you're going to see as bullet points are just sort of like some of the more recent updates that have come in from the product teams over the last couple of years. Some of them are fairly new, some of them have been around for a while, but the main point is to show you that the teams are continuing to innovate and add more features that developers are asking for. So as a developer advocate, even though I'm advocating our technologies to you all, I expect you guys to come talk to me so that I can advocate on your behalf to the product teams, especially if there's a feature that's missing in an API or if there's something that's not quite working. I have a direct line to the product managers and the engineers on the teams so I can communicate on your behalf. So it's a two-way street. Okay, so we're going to start with Google Drive. I'm probably not going to go over the bullet points because we're a little bit short on time. The main idea is to go through each working code sample so you can see how it works and how not so difficult it is to get going. Okay, so why would you want to use the Drive API? There's lots of different reasons. One of them is a use case where you're trying to back up all your file archives. Maybe they're all zip files and they're all compressed. You can't really look at them when they're in compressed mode. What you can do is you can write an application to take these archive files, upload them to Google Drive, which then automatically deflate them so they're installed, in full glory that you can see from your Drive previewer, but the folder name is the name of your archive so that you know where those files come from. So that's one example. And you can talk to me later. We actually have that as an open source example, so you can go and take a look at that code on GitHub. Another thing that you can do is, well, first, let me ask a question. How many of you out there have a very large multi-terabyte hard drive that you just empty your camera out when you get back home from vacation? Are those pictures organized in any way? They're just there. So you know they're there. It's safe. But they're not in a presentable format. Okay, so one of the things that you can get from the Drive API is you have access to the image file metadata. Same thing goes for video. I think you get more metadata from images than from videos, but for images, you get date and timestamps, you get the geolocation, so you can actually automate building of photo albums based on date and time, vacation, as well as using the geolocation to figure out where you are. So summer vacation in France, winter skiing trip to Lake Tahoe or Whistler or something like that. Or you can auto-generate collages. Okay, so these are just some hints as to what you would want to consider doing with the Drive API. So let's look at our first code sample. Okay, so I'm going to walk through a little bit of the authorization code first, just to do some boilerplate, because you have to do this anyway, right? So there are two different ways of accessing Google APIs. If it's public data, like searching for YouTube videos, which are public, or public Google Plus posts, which are also public, or asking the Cloud Natural Language API to do some sentiment analysis on an English sentence, all those things are public data, so you would be using an API key. And they're really simple. You just go into your developer console, you create the API key, you put it in your code or put it in a secure place that your code can access, and then you're done. But when you're accessing something that is private information, such as your first 100 files and folders on Google Drive, well, that's protected information. So that requires you to use OAuth because the user has to give authorization to your application to actually access their data on their behalf. Okay, everybody understand that? Between API key, simple access, simple API access, and then authorized access for more secure data. Okay, so we're going to walk through the sample code here that goes over what this security looks like. So aside from the imports at the top, we have something called the scopes. So a scope is basically a permission that your app is asking your users for. Okay, how many people, when they install an app, there's a little window that says this app needs to access your phone number, your camera, your firstborn children, or whatever, right? Doesn't it make you a little uncomfortable to install that app because it's asking for all these permissions, and you're going, why does it need all those permissions? Okay, so now as developers, we're on the other side of the fence, which is now we're going to be asking our users to opt in and give the permissions for our app to execute. So the best practice that we recommend is you use the minimal amount of scopes that you need so that your app functions. That way, your users are more comfortable installing your app. Okay, giving an app access to your Google Drive, that already sounds kind of scary, right? But it doesn't have to be if you ask for a different type of scope. For example, all I want to do is list the files, folders, and types. I don't need to access the data in their drive. I don't need to modify their data. I'm not going to add files to their drive. I'm not going to make any modifications whatsoever. So one, I can just use a drive read-only scope, which is much more benign than a read-write scope, right? And then the other thing is I don't even need to look at the files. I just want the file name and the type. So that's file metadata. So I can ask for, drives, read-only scope, and metadata only, top of that. Okay? So that is probably the most minimal scope that you can ask for in order to have this simple app work. Obviously, for your application, it's going to be a little bit different. All right, so anyway, so the next line of code is storage.json. When you create a project in the developer console, it will prompt you as soon as you create your OAuth information to download your client secret and your ID so that you can use them in your application. All right, and so here we're just saying store all the access tokens and the refresh tokens in this storage.json file. You can call it whatever you want. Okay, but then we try to get the credentials out of that file. And if I don't have any credentials or somehow they got invalidated because either they were revoked or they expired, okay, then we have to go through the process of bringing up that little window, that OAuth window, where it's going to say, I need to view your drive file metadata. Okay, and it will only say view. It will not say anything like create or modify or anything like that because it's read-only. So the permissions that you see in the OAuth window basically get converted to that English text from these scopes, which are just long URLs. Okay, and so we need to build that flow. So that's what this client flow from secrets comes from. So you pass in the client secret file that you downloaded with your API project, you merge that with the permissions that you're asking for, and then it builds this OAuth flow. And then, of course, the next step is you have to run this flow so that the user actually sees that OAuth box pop up on their desktop or on their mobile device. Okay, and so that's where the run flow call comes in. Now, as soon as the user hits accept, then everything continues, and then we get to actually the meat of our app. So in this particular case, the authorization code takes more lines of code than the actual application itself. Okay, that's probably not going to be the case for your code, but just wanted to give you a heads up that there is a lot of auth code. But the fact is that because the client library is taking care of a lot of stuff behind the scenes for you, this is a lot less code than you would have to do if you implemented your own client library or wanted to use HTTP, raw HTTP to talk to the API. Okay. If the user clicked cancel because they didn't want to give you permission, then an exception will be thrown at run flow, and then it will not continue down. Okay, so anyway, so now we'll get to our application. So now that we have valid credentials, what do? We want to build a service endpoint to the Drive API. Okay, so discovery.build Drive, and then we're currently on version 3. There's also a version 2. Both of those are still, alive, so you can use either. V3 is a little bit faster, and there's a little less confusion because we cancel a lot of duplicate names and things like that, but it performs a little bit better. So we recommend you start with V3. And then the next step is we need to create an HTTP client to talk to the API. So we do that by instantiating it, and then we pass that to authorize that with your credentials. So what happens is all of your communication to the API is signed with your credentials, and everything's encrypted over the wire. All right, so once we have a service endpoint to the Drive API, then we call drive.files.list.execute, and what we get back is a set of files. So we save files. In case nothing comes back, we'll save an empty array. Okay, and then all we do is just for loop list, go through each one and print out the file name and MIME type. Is that really hard to understand? Right? Forget about the auth code, but the application itself, is it that hard? All right, it isn't that hard at all. You do have to chase down the documentation to find the exact feature that you're looking for, and if there isn't anything there, you can file a feature request. Otherwise, should be enough documentation to get you going so that you know what calls you can make, what the parameters are, and get the results and process them right away. Okay, and by the way, so I mentioned earlier that I do a video show, and for every time you see like a little blue box up there with a short link, that's usually a link to a video where I actually walk through this the sample that you see here on screen. So in case you just completely fall asleep because the lunch was so good, you can always dial into the video and review what we covered. Okay? All right, so we're okay with Drive? All right, let's move on to the Google Slides API. This one is kind of unique because we previewed this API at Google I/O in 2016, and we actually launched the very first API for Google Slides that November. So it's been around for less than 2 years, and already people are doing crazy cool stuff with it. Okay, so what is a reason why you would use the Google Slides API? Well, you might have a lot of useful information in a spreadsheet. You may have created a chart or two. But that's still not as presentable as a slide deck. You probably have to present something to management, so why not use a Slides API to extract the relevant data from the spreadsheet and then create a slide presentation with that data? Okay, That's one use case. Another use case is, let's say you're in sales and you've got 100 clients that you need to visit this month. And you've built one master slide deck, but you want to have each slide deck customized for every customer that you visit, right? Well, what you can do is you can make one master template, get everything in there, put variables in, okay, variables in for like the company name or their corporate logo, and then you can auto-generate all these slide decks based on the master, but customized for each individual customer for you. Okay, so that's another use case. And I'd like to highlight one cool example that we have. It's a medium-sized application. It's a Node.js app that lets you write an entire slide presentation in Markdown format, and then it will auto-generate a Google Slides presentation for you. So it's got a lot of stars on it, so you should take a look at it, take it apart. It's a pretty fun one, and I've been, honestly, not this particular presentation, but I've been sort of like using it to build my own presentations internally, so it's a pretty cool tool. All right, let's look at some code. So just like what I said, the second example where you have a master template and you want to visit 100 customers and you want to customize a special slide deck just for them. Well, in this particular case, I have title as perhaps the company name. In this case, it's just a test, so I'm going to replace all instances of curly title, which is my template variable, with hello world. And perhaps a corporate logo where I have the URL here, and I replace all these logo variables with whatever that product logo is or the corporate logo for the customer I want to visit. And then what you don't see is, if you remember the code for Google Drive, you did all that OAuth code. Well, guess what? It's identical. The only difference is the scope's going to be different because you're going to be asking for a Google Slide scope. And then down at the bottom, when you create the service endpoint, instead of drive equals, you will have slides equals discovery.build slides API version 1. Okay, and then once you have that, well, then you can just do slides.presentations.batch update. So now I have two commands here: the replace all text command and the replace all images, all shapes with image command. So I'm sending two commands to the API, batching them up, and then shipping them off to that particular slide deck ID. And I just set fields to like nothing to mean I don't care about getting anything back. I just want it done. I don't care about return values. Okay, and then there's a video for this one as well too. All right, so how about Google Sheets? We launched a new API in v4 at I/O 2016, and this was a big deal, so I'll point this out in a little bit. But the most recently, we launched a macro recording feature in April, and that automatically generates AppScript code, so we will get to AppScript momentarily, but that's the latest new hot feature. So why the Sheets API? Well, kind of similar to Slides. Maybe I have a lot of data in a database. Can't really show that to managers. They don't want, they're not going to be able to do select star from, unless you're an executive of a very small company, in which case you probably know how to do that. But what you can do is you can use the Sheets API. Sorry, it says Slides. I don't know why it says Slides. It should be Sheets. So Sheets API can automatically take that data out of a database and put it into a spreadsheet for you. And once it's in the spreadsheet, then you can generate images and charts and anything else that you can do in Google Sheets. Another thing I wanted to point out, which I mentioned earlier, is v4 is much more powerful than any previous API. So if you're still using the XML v3 and older and using feeds and stuff like that, that is way passé. In fact, the only things you could do with APIs earlier than v4 are the things that are not bolded. So create new sheets within existing spreadsheets and add data to sheets, and obviously read data from sheets. Okay, which I don't have listed there because why have an API if you can't read from a spreadsheet, right? But with v4, you can do all these other new things that you couldn't do before. And the team's goal is even more powerful, and that is they want you to be able to do anything, basically anything you can do sitting down in front of Google Sheets with the user interface, you should be able to do with the API. So that is their goal. They want feature for feature parity as much as possible. So the API is very, very powerful. Okay. All right. So let's look at that first example. I want to migrate a bunch of SQL data to a sheet. Okay, so we have a bunch of fields representing a fictitious toy order manufacturer, all right, and customer orders. Okay, and you can see the columns up at the top there. There is a SQLite database that I'm just going to select all the current orders, And then I'm going to insert all the column names because I want that to be at the top of my spreadsheet. So I insert that into, row 0 of the array. All right, so that's what the rows.insert call is for. Then I create a spreadsheet using, oh, by the way, sheets equals discovery.build sheets API v4. Are you guys getting the hang of this? Okay, there's a pattern here. I'm not showing any of that auth code because it's identical for all these use cases. All right. So I'm going to create the spreadsheet using this metadata here. The name of the spreadsheet is called customer orders. I'm going to execute that and then get the spreadsheet ID. Okay, that's easy. Then the next step is to take all that data and just flush that into the spreadsheet. So spreadsheets.values.update what ID the spreadsheet was, starting at cell A1, the data, and then raw input, and then go, and it does it. Okay. By the way, there's another input option instead of raw as an alternative called user entered. So if you already had some pre-formatted fields, like some fields were bolded, some fields were formatted for finance and things like that, you can use, instead of raw, you can use user entered, because what that will do is that will insert the data as if you sat in front of a spreadsheet and typed it in manually. Okay, so your two choices are raw or user entered. What else can you do? Well, maybe we want to freeze that first row, the headers. We want to freeze that so when you keep on scrolling up, row 1 stays there. And perhaps you want to bold it as well too, because I want to kind of make it stand out. All right, so we have two commands here. One is frozen rows are a sheet property, so I'm going to update sheet properties by setting the frozen row count to 1. And then I want to bold the first row, so that requires updating the user entered format.textformat.bold flag to true. And then, similar to slides, I call the batch update command, send the request over, pass in the spreadsheet ID, and then I don't care about any return values, and then execute. Okay? Pretty straightforward, right? Everybody with me so far? All right. And again, you can do this in any programming language that's supported by our client libraries, so it doesn't have to be Python. It's just in this Python data structure looks very similar to a JSON data structure. Okay. All right, let's talk about Gmail. Gmail API. Why did we invent the Gmail API? The reason is because you may be familiar with well-known internet protocols like SMTP, POP, IMAP, and all of those, right? Those are long-lived internet protocols that have been there for a long, long time. The problem is they haven't kept up to date with the way people use email today. They don't understand the concept of folders and labels. They don't understand vacation responders, email signatures. Those things are beyond what those protocols are able to understand. And so that's why we ended up building the Gmail API back, I think, in 2014. So here's an example of using the Gmail API. So pretend I have an email address that I use just for mailing lists. Okay, and I'm only interested in threads that people are talking about rigorously. So threads that have more than 10 responses. Okay, so in the first couple lines of code, oh, by the way, Gmail equals discovery.build Gmail v1, right? Okay, then I can go Gmail users threads, me, all right? I want to get the threads. And then once I have all the threads, I'm going to go through and look and see how many messages are in each thread. So if I don't have any messages, so it's possible, okay, so Gmail does allow you to delete individual messages from a thread. You can delete them all and have nothing. So I have this if statement to check for that. If I don't have any messages, I don't care. I'm just going to skip to the next one. But if I have more than 10 messages, that means 11 or more, then I'm going to go through the first message and scan for the subject line. So what I do is I get all the headers and I look through the headers for the subject line. As soon as I find one, I save it. And if the subject line is not blank, then I'm going to display how many messages are in that thread and show the subject line. Okay? It's not a mission critical app, but it's meant to give you an idea of what you can do with the Gmail API. And I think I have a couple of videos on that. This is one of them, but I think there's another one. Okay? So that's Gmail. Let's talk about Google Calendar. So one of the reasons why you would do Calendar, so let me step back a bit. Why would you want to build something with a Calendar API? So pretend you're writing the next generation travel app and you're making bookings for people, whether it be booking their airline, hotel, or whatnot. And you want to be able to prevent your users from having to wait for your email response, go through, get all the details, copy the dates, copy the times, and then write them into their calendar. Why can't you do that for them? Wouldn't that be a better user experience, right? And some people often say, hey, doesn't Gmail have this feature where, if it finds one of these confirmations that automatically adds an event to your calendar? I go, yes, but that's only a one-way street. What if I change my reservation? Well, now my calendar is going to have 2 events in it where one of them is completely wrong. Okay, so as the application developer, you have full control. Once you create an event using the calendar API, I don't save it here, but you can actually save the event ID. Again, once you have an event ID, if that user does change their reservations, you could actually auto-adjust their calendar entry so they don't have to do it manually. This gives users a really, really good experience. Okay, so in this case, I'm just setting up dinner with friends. When do I start? When do I end? Who my friends are? And then I just do, Google Calendar equals discovery.build calendar API v3, all right? And then I have gcal.events insert into my primary calendar or any secondary calendar. You just have to have the calendar ID right there, all right? The metadata from the event. Send notifications to my friends so that they know they got invited for dinner. Nothing return, and then execute. Okay. Hopefully you guys are trying to get bored with this because you're seeing the same pattern over and over again. And I'm just trying to give you inspiration as to what kind of things you would do with what APIs. Okay, so let's change gears a little bit because we're running out of time and talk about serverless platforms. So we have AppScript. We've had 2 great talks on AppScript today, and you can go through and watch the videos when you get back home. Unfortunately, we don't have any more of the major ones. But AppScript is a serverless environment that gives you access to all the G Suite services you're familiar with, but it gives you more than that. Okay, so your hello world looks something like this. This particular piece of code is connected to a spreadsheet. So if you're in a spreadsheet and you bring up the code editor, you can do something like spreadsheet app.getActiveSpreadsheet, get me the cell A1, and then set this text string in that cell A1. So this is a 1-line JavaScript piece of code that I've broken up into 4 lines so you could read it easier. All right, but what that does is that will do that. Once you just get that 1-line code working, then your imagination is just going to run wild what you can do with it, right? But this is a very powerful thing because as a human, you did not type hello world into that spreadsheet cell. You had code do that for you, and that's very empowering. You'll feel like the champagne picture you saw earlier. Okay, you're going to feel like that once you get something working. Okay, so there's your intro video for that. What else can you do? So here's another spreadsheet that only has a couple of things in it, right? We have an address header, and then we have an actual address. Happens to be the address of Google's New York office. But what can you do with that? Well, what you can do is you can also get the active spreadsheet. I can also get cell A1, but now instead of setting the value to hello world, I'm pulling out the value. Okay, in this case, actually, it should be A2 because my spreadsheet has address as the header. So mentally change that to A2. Then I can say, hey, Google Maps. All right, now Google Maps is entering the picture. It's not part of G Suite, but it is a Google service, and it's available to you from AppScript. You can say, Google Maps, make me a new map and put a pin on that address. Okay, just like that. Even better, I could say, hey, Gmail, email that map to my friend so that I can invite them to come over for lunch. Okay, and when you send that with a map subject line, they will get an email with a map subject line, and now they have a link. Of course, you can make this even more complicated. You can actually use, Google Maps has driving directions. You can actually send that to your friend. All right, so they don't even have to look it up in an app. All right, and then this is actually the sample that's used in our code lab. So if you guys want to do hands-on, all right, sign up for our Friday bootcamp. We still have a few more seats left. Then you'll be building this app. It's only 4 lines of code, but what's really cool is that it touches 3 different Google products, right? Google Sheets, Google Maps, and Gmail. All right, it's 4 lines of code, and it does something almost useful, right? But you can just imagine where you can take this, though. Maybe you are a salesperson. You do have to visit all of your customers in New York. Why can't you put them all on a map so that you can kind of plan what your route is? Maybe you have a book club that you're part of, or maybe you belong to a user group, right? You can send the map to everybody in the user group or the book club to tell them where to meet this month. Okay, so you can actually make real uses out of this. So my goal is to sort of inspire you to make you kind of think outside the box. Now, what else can you do? okay, with that code sample that seemed like it could be useful, but now you can actually think about what you can really do to make it useful. Okay. AppScript also powers add-ons. So if you've heard of add-ons, Docs add-ons, Sheets add-ons, Slides, Gmail add-ons, okay, AppScript is behind all of those. And if you are going to write an add-on, you will write them in AppScript. So the original add-ons were Docs and Sheets. They came out in mid-2004, and then Google Forms add-ons came out towards the end of, sorry, did I say 2004? 2014. And Forms came out at the end of 2014. And then more recently, Google Slides add-ons came out at third quarter of 2017, and then towards the end of the year, Gmail add-ons came out as well too. So now you can actually do these. Okay, so what do they look like? Here is an add-on that I built with Slides where I have a whole bunch of images online, and they could also be images in a Drive folder. It could be images on a folder on your local computer. All right, doesn't matter. The sample was just easier to write if they were all online and we had URLs. So that's what I did. And you can take all those images and generate a slide that looks just like that. Okay, here's the code that does that. All right, so let's start with main. So here are my 4 images. Okay, you know when you create a new slide deck, the thing that you always get is page 1, which is the title slide. So let's fill in the title and the subtitle. So the title is listed above, my favorite images, and then the subtitle I put down here. Okay, and then I have a for loop. So the for loop is going to loop through each of the 4 images, and for every image, I'm going to call add image slide, which is this function that appends a blank slide to the end of the existing presentation, and then inserts an image based on that link. That's it. It's pretty basic. And you can watch the video to kind of like get a little bit more details. There's a little bit more to it than what I've shown here, just a tiny bit more. But this is a good start, right? So that's a Slides add-on. A Gmail add-on. So we kind of understand a Docs add-on, a Sheets add-on, a Slides add-on, because those 3 are editors, right? What about Gmail? It can't be tied to a particular document, right? When would you use an add-on for Gmail? Well, one of the use cases that we came up with, or at least my summer intern came up with last summer, is that if you're traveling, I'm always thinking of travel, probably because I'm on the road giving talks a lot. You're going to have an airline receipt, you're going to have a hotel receipt, you're going to have some rideshare receipt, and they're all coming through your Gmail. The problem is now you have to go through and cut and paste from each of these individual messages and put them in some spreadsheet that you can send as part of your expense report to accounts payable. Why do that when you can automate it directly from Gmail without leaving Gmail and pasting it into a different app in a different tab? Okay, so we can create an expense report that runs side by side within Gmail. You don't have to leave Gmail. You can get a form that is smart enough to go and extract using regular expressions the content of the receipt, such as the date, the amount incurred, the vendor. All you have to do is enter a spreadsheet URL, click submit, okay, the expense is logged, and then what you'll have is a spreadsheet that has all of your expenses. You never had to leave Gmail as you're flipping through these really quickly. Okay, so a little bit of the code. This app is a little bit larger because we had to build the UI for it. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit about what the UI is going to look like towards the end of the talk. So anyway, this part of the code just creates the form that you see. So you can kind of get an idea that, you know, here's the part where I enter the spreadsheet information, and then what happens is you build the widget chunk by chunk, and then at the very end you just add them all together, and then you return a card. So it's a JSON tree structure basically. It's like a document. Okay, so that's that. All right, changing gears a tiny bit more. We're still in the land of AppScript, and that is Hangouts Chat. So Hangouts Chat launched very recently, about 4 or 5 months ago. Well, mostly 4 months ago, because it was the very last day of February when we launched. Hangouts Chat is our next generation chat system. It's available for G Suite customers, so unfortunately you can't access it from your Gmail accounts yet. And the main point is that this platform is not just for conversations. You can actually write bots, or what you should think of as microservice utility apps that can do stuff for you. So with the bot framework and API, you can build chat bots that would automate workflows that you would have to use to do manually. You can query for information and do other heavy lifting. Okay, so a little bit of motivation for all you technical leaders out there was written by the Motorola Solutions corporate VP and CIO. And he published this blog post 6 days after we launched. 6 days, and he wasn't even a test partner. Okay. He was able to do something quite amazing. So what he did was, okay, so here's the first quote that comes from this blog post. This might not seem game-changing at first glance. And then he goes on in this blog post to describe how he built an ERP bot that takes an order number and returns what warranties apply for all the products in that order, because he joined multiple ERP systems together to collate the information and return that just from a chat inquiry. Okay, and then the second thing he did was build a bot that can query their enterprise data warehouse, where for any given calendar day, so you enter the calendar day, it can summarize the total number of shipments in US dollars and show what the top 10 biggest shipments were for that particular day. By connecting different systems together using the bot service, you can chat with the bot to ask it for this information. The bot does all the work, and it just sends back a chat message to you as if it was talking to you. So you can make agents that work on your behalf. Okay, so that's the power of writing Hangouts chatbots. So let's look at something simple, something much more simple, like asking your coworkers, who wants to go to lunch today? Okay, so this is a vote bot, all right, where people can click for setting up a new vote, or they can click +1 or -1 for whether they want to go to lunch. And the code looks something like this, where you can actually see if they click new vote, then create a brand new vote card. And notice there's a card there, so it's very similar. It uses the same technology as the Gmail add-ons we just saw. All right, and depending on what they clicked on, whether it's an upvote or downvote, you can see ++ and -, and then render that message. Okay, so what does the code to render the card look like? There's a little bit more, so it's JSON markup. All right, so you can see you're building the card step by step. I'll tell you, who was the last person that voted, the number of votes so far, +1 for upvote, -1 for downvote, and then the new button starts a new vote. Okay, and depending on what they do, if it's a new vote, then it creates a new message, but if it's a plus or minus, then it updates the existing message. So these cards are interactive. In other words, when somebody votes, you don't have to create a new card and clutter up the chat window. It modifies the card. You can actually see the vote count and the last vote by get updated up there, or it tells you that it changes. You can see the vote count go up, right? So interactive cards. So that's Hangouts chatbots, and then a video goes with that too. All right, App Maker just launched last month, so obviously there's a lot of hype behind it, and it is as good as it looks. All right, so we had 2 talks on App Maker, one talk on App Maker today, and then another one you should go to on Thursday, which is more for developers. Today's talk, which just happened an hour ago, was for higher level executives, and also to kind of like motivate people to describe like what were the reasons behind this, and also show some use cases from existing customers that were part of our early access program. They built pretty interesting apps in App Maker. But Thursday's talk is more for developers, so I invite you guys to go and see that. But the main idea is that App Maker is a low-code assistive development environment where you can go from an idea to an app in minutes, because you're dragging and dropping, you're using built-in templates, using point-and-click data modeling. It makes it much easier. However, under the covers, it auto-generates AppScript code. So if you know AppScript, then you can further customize your App Maker app more than someone who doesn't know AppScript. Okay, so knowing AppScript is a good idea. All right, so let's wrap up. So a few other things that I didn't get a chance to talk about. They don't get a lot of limelight, but I do want to mention that for all the admins out there, if you are a G Suite user, you'll have lots of users, and it's not fun if you have 100 new employees and you have to manually create everybody's Drive, Gmail, and Calendar one at a time. You really want to automate this stuff. So we have an admin SDK that lets you do that, and you can do stuff with both REST APIs as well as with AppScript. And it's not just users, it's also managing groups. It's also creating reports to give your administrators an idea of the type of activity that people are doing in their domains, whether they're using mobile apps versus the web apps more. It also lets resellers manage licenses and things like that. So that's why it's called the SDK, because it's multiple APIs in one. There's a management API, there's directory API, a reports API, license API, reseller API. So all those things put together constitute the admin SDK. There's also the Google Classroom API. So if you are working in an educational institution, or if you offer corporate training within your organizations, you can use Google Classroom. So like I said, it has an API. You can do different things with it related to coursework, students, teachers, guardians, things like that. There's also Google Vault, which is available only for G Suite customers. So this is where you need to manage e-discovery and compliance, as well as legal matters and holds. So this API launched just about a year ago. So that's new. And then I want to mention the other side of Google Cloud, which is GCP. I think the important thing I want to tell you here is that you can use GCP APIs just like the G Suite APIs, okay? Because they're also Google APIs too. All right, for example, BigQuery, right? Everyone's heard of BigQuery. It's a data analysis tool that lets you perform queries across multiple terabytes of data and get back results in seconds instead of like hours or days or anything like that. But you can similarly do BigQuery equals discovery.build BigQuery API v2, okay, and you can actually do, provide your query in your code, and you can say BigQuery.query. One of the things that makes GCP APIs a little bit different is that sometimes you have to add the project ID. So in this case, I pass in the project ID along with my query, and then I get my results, and it'll dump out. So this just looks for the 10 most common Shakespeare words. This is a query that's been around for a long time. I'm pretty sure some of you have already seen it before. But you get your output, and of course, BigQuery also has a user interface as well. The main idea is that if you actually work really hard in the user interface and you develop the exact query that you want, you can just cut and paste that into your code, and instantly you can have it automated. Okay, so using GCP APIs is going to be very similar to G Suite APIs. So that's that takeaway. I just want to say sort of one word on non-authorized data. So I mentioned earlier that simple API access just requires an API key because you're looking for public data like Google Plus posts or using the natural language API to do sentiment on a language. And of course, here's the searching for a public YouTube video. Since I do Python, I'm often looking for Python videos, but for some reason they all have snakes. I just don't know why. I want to see code. So I have to give a query of Python minus snake in order to get the videos that I want to see. Okay, it's strange. Who knows, right? Anyway, the other question that people often ask is, well, that's great that you showed us each of these examples of APIs, but what if I want to do something like the sales thing that you talked about earlier? What if I had a copy of a master template, a slide deck in my Google Drive? Can I copy that? How do I copy that? Well, guess what? Copying a file uses the Drive API. So you can use the Drive API to copy the slide template file, and then you're going to get the customer's information from a Google Sheet. So every customer will have a customer name, a client contact name, and then a URL for their corporate logo. It's all in the spreadsheet, right? Then you're going to read that data from the sheets, and then you're going to auto-generate those slides out of it. So this is actually the beginning of that particular app. I haven't written yet, but I'm hoping one of you all will write it tonight or before dinner time, because you can do it that fast. Okay? All right, so where do we go next? I mentioned that we have a couple of blogs you can follow us on. We have a bunch of Twitters as well. If you want to get hands-on, the Drive example with the first 100 files and folders, that is available as a code lab. And then AppScript introduction, if you're new to it, that's also available as a code lab. Like I said before, we still have room in the Friday bootcamp. So if you haven't left yet or your developers aren't leaving until after Friday, you can take our bootcamp. It's Friday at 1:30 to 6, 4.5 hours of hands-on. You will actually leave with those sample apps running, okay, with you, all right? And there's also some intermediate code labs too under others. There are some videos. I have no private life, so feel free to watch my videos and until you get tired of my voice. All right, and then for reading and doing, you can also read our documentation, G Suite for the APIs, and then AppScript for AppScript, and then of course /AppMaker for AppMaker. And then we also have a monthly newsletter that you can also read to keep up to date. All right. Other sessions that you may be interested in besides the bootcamp on Friday, there is a talk on the sheet slides and docs called CP301. It's building on the docs editor. So anytime you see the word editors, it's doc sheet slides. Okay? And then automating AppScript, this happened earlier today, so I'll have to watch the video for it. This is the talk that's given by the AppScript team where they had real user use cases described, as well as a roadmap of future features that are coming to AppScript. I'm giving a talk tomorrow on how you can do more of this interoperation or interoperability between G Suite and GCP. We're going to write a GCP app that analyzes G Suite data, and then on the other side, I have a G Suite app that uses GCP technologies. So the whole premise of that talk is to show you how to use both sides of the house. And then we also have an AppMaker talk as well. And the main idea is why am I giving this talk to you guys? So that brings G Suite APIs and developer tools to your front of mind so you know they exist and show what you can do. Ultimately, we want you to be both successful and if you're a customer, a happy one. All right, thank you for coming.